Good afternoon and happy Friday, everyone who's tuning in here in our remote session for the John F. Kennedy Library Foundation. I'm Rachel Flor, Executive Director of the John F. Kennedy Library Foundation, and it's so wonderful to have you all join us for the fourth New Frontier Fridays conversation, Leadership, Not Salesmanship, Innovation, Economic Justice, and Equity. The New Frontier Network brings together individuals with no living memory of President Kennedy to advance his legacy and nonpartisan ideals of civic engagement and public service. Through this New Frontier Network conversation series, the JFK Library Foundation seeks to use President Kennedy's inspiring legacy to help us confront today's challenges. I want to recognize and thank our New Frontier Network Steering Committee, co-chaired by Sarah Stefani and Terrence Burke. We hope our New Frontier Friday series will guide us all to find inspiration to become better leaders and citizens. I also want to thank the generous sponsors who make the New Frontier Network's initiatives possible: John Hancock, Boston Capital, and Blue Cross Blue Shield of Massachusetts. We are truly honored to count you among our partners. Today, we are so privileged to be joined by Howard Brodsky, co-founder and Chairman and Co-Chief Executive Officer of CCA Global Partners, and Glynn Lloyd, Executive Director of the Foundation for Business Equity. Recognized as pioneers in the cooperative business model, as a pioneer in the cooperative business model, Howard Brodsky has dedicated his career to helping entrepreneurs build successful businesses by providing the scale and revenue they need to compete. Comprised of 14 cooperative businesses, CCA Global has an aggregated revenue of over $10 billion and is one of the largest privately held companies in the United States. They also invest in early childhood education centers and nonprofit organizations through CCA for social good and mission builders to leverage resources for optimal success. Last October, Howard was the first American to receive the Rochdale Pioneers Award, given every 2 years to an individual who's contributed to innovative and financially sustainable cooperative activities that have significantly benefited cooperative members. Glynn Lloyd has dedicated his career to the field of transformative urban economic development. He is the founder of City Fresh Foods, a nationally renowned food service business, as well as the Urban Farming Institute, a community-led nonprofit that supports the development of the urban farming industry in Massachusetts. Glynn helped found the Black Economic Council of Massachusetts, a coalition of Black business, community, religious, and labor leaders working together to improve economic indicators in the Black community. Most recently, he helped develop and is executing the Foundation for Business Equity's Business Equity Initiative, which is designed to scale up local Black and Latinx enterprises in Eastern Massachusetts to close the racial wealth gap. Small businesses have faced unprecedented challenges during the COVID-19 pandemic. In today's conversation, Howard and Glynn will share how collaborative ecosystems promote business growth and resiliency through optimized resources, strategic advising, and access to customers. I would now like to welcome Glynn to start the conversation.
Thanks, Rachel. So Howard, I think you and I know there's been a lot of conversations about small business in the media, the importance of small business. I'm a particular fan of cooperatives, but I'd love to hear for our audience from you more about how it works within your model, but also why this approach?
Thanks, Glenn. You know, first of all, I think we're in an extremely vulnerable time for small businesses in America. They're very vulnerable. And as you said, coming out of COVID, they've been even more vulnerable. But first of all, the cooperative is the shared business model. I think a lot of times it's misunderstood and people think cooperative, it's a food co-op, it's something, it's a very big part of actually our economy and around the world. But what it does, it gives scale. It gives scale to family businesses that don't have scale by themselves. You know, the biggest thing, family businesses have the passion, they have the motivation, they have the connection to community. They don't have scale. And they're vulnerable, and the failure rate is very, very large, especially among minority and Black businesses. It's extremely large. But what cooperative can do, it gives scale to buying, it gives scale to merchandising, it scales to everything they need, insurance, to run their business, so they can run their business themselves in their own way while we give them the scale. And the other thing with the cooperative is they own it. So yes, our company is over a $10 billion company, and we serve over 1 million small businesses and 22,000 childcare centers. And yet I don't own a share of the company. I was the co-founder, I'm chairman, and co-CEO, but I don't own a share. The company is owned by family businesses across America. And I think that's the difference of a cooperative. You know, I think we live in a society where the winner takes all. And I don't think everybody wants just the Amazons of the world and the Walmarts of the world and the Home Depot of the world to control our society. In some ways, so many ways, I believe small businesses are the fabric of our communities. They're what holds our communities together. And they're vulnerable, though. They're extremely vulnerable. And the failure rate is so great right now that they need glue. And how are they going to get that glue? What they're missing is they wake up every morning to go in that business with their passion, but they don't have the expertise of how to deal with a COVID. They don't have the expertise of how to get capital when the market is not ready to give them capital. They don't have the expertise on digital marketing. They have a lot, and I call it, what we do is capitalism with a conscience. It's capitalism without a question. You know, I think in the world we live in, we think that either has to be capitalism or socialism. I don't think that's true. We're very entrepreneurial. We believe in capitalism. The only difference is our profit goes back to the people that use it. It goes back to the members. And it's interesting, co-ops are extremely successful. We've never had an unprofitable quarter. But all the money goes back to the people, the family businesses that are the very heart of America, around our country and around the world, actually. And, you know, it's so critical that they have those resources in time of need. We see it, you know, that when a family business goes out, it affects and scales so many different things, Glynn, that affects our world. It affects their community, affects their family, affects the people that used to work for them. You know, I say we're in the business of saving family businesses in America, and they're worth saving. And I think a lot of people in the capital markets look and say, well, you know, we only want to invest in companies that can go in the stock exchange, that have a 50 times return. Well, you know, we can't live in a society where it's the winner take all. I think we have to live in a society that's shared wealth, shared economy, and shared opportunity. And that's what cooperatives do. The contemporary cooperative model is about shared opportunity and shared hope. And it's living with dignity. And I think that's what our society needs. That's what we're so short on.
I think that's great. I think what I heard earlier, and I think we're doing some of the things in our world, Howard, is about scale, right? And it's about scale so that these smaller independent operators can compete with you know, the larger corporations. And I think that, you know, in our economy, we need to, you know, a little bit of balance between the two.
Right.
And so I've got to know you through this process, and I admire the work.
And I'm very curious. I know you've done so much to help small business and minority business and Black business and Latino businesses in Massachusetts. And maybe you can tell us some of the work that you're doing, because I know it's been fascinating and you've had such success with it.
Yeah, and I think similar to, you know, how you started with it, which is how do we scale, especially entrepreneurs who have from structural issues, institutional issues, really don't have the same access to some of the same tools to grow. And so we said we need to level the playing field and allow for our Black and Latino entrepreneurs to reach their full potential. And so we do this in a number of ways. Similar, I think, how you guys support your members, which is we see these patterns of, it starts with really good advice, right? So making sure that folks, you know, have very good strategies and they can execute towards those strategies as entrepreneurs and as leaders of their organizations, and then matching that with access to capital and credit, which is critical, which again is problematic for a lot of Black and Latino entrepreneurs in terms of, you know, whether it be banking or venture. I mean, I won't go, the list of numbers is depressing. So we really need to open up these resources for these businesses. And then the other kind of leg of the stool is what else out there is important for growth. And one we focused on, which is access to contracts and pushing the large corporates, government to spend more dollars. Again, those stats are equally depressing, right? When you have, you know, a lot of your corporations spending, you know, less than 1-2% of their revenues or their purchasing power, I should say, on minority companies. And so we really got to push on all angles. And then hopefully, and as we've seen this in our world, when you see all that happening together, you see these companies start to thrive and grow. Of course, then we get recently hit with something that unprecedented, which is COVID. But the same tools that we're doing pre-COVID is we're doing today, which is it's really good advice wrapped around with access to capital and credit. And where else in the ecosystem can we be pushing? And to your point earlier, I mean, I think it's about the relationship to the community. A lot of these entrepreneurs are anchors. You know, their organizations are anchors. They're employing a lot of people. We had one particular company we were working with is they do cleaning services and such. And you know, in the relationship we've had with them in the last few years, they've been able to, you know, double their staff. And these are, you know, are really good jobs. They're actually union jobs in this particular sense. So there's a lot of benefits clearly as we strengthen what we call the main streets and the back streets businesses in our communities. They're critical to I think the health of our economy.
Yeah, you know, we found, Glenn, that during COVID, it was like during the Great Recession, that the family businesses needed us more than ever. It's when they needed somebody to lean on to tell them direction. It's when they needed somebody to lean on to say, you know, how do you fill out the payroll protection plan? How do you get access to it? What are the right steps? What's the right marketing during this period? You know, what should I be doing with my purchases? They needed so much guidance, lease negotiations. We found they needed an enormous amount of help because they needed relief on their lease because all of a sudden their business went from X amount to zero. And so there was a tremendous need. We found childcare centers that we have over 21,000 childcare centers we support. And, you know, just on, you know, equipment for their, you know, protection equipment, how are they going to all of a sudden clean the childcare centers to have, so it's virus free and a lot of the essential work.
Can I ask you a question? I'm curious, Howard. Sure. Of the 14 or so members, did mostly all, if not all, get the PPP? And I'm assuming they found it helpful.
Yeah. So you know, we had over 90% in across the United States. We have stores in Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, but in the United States, we had over 90% apply and get funded within 7 days, which was incredible. Within 24 hours, we had 90% apply because we had an entire team calling them, working with them to say, this is what you need to do. Make sure you do it. Make sure you wake up tomorrow morning and this is how you can do it. These is how you're going to fill out the forms. They needed that hand-holding because they weren't sure what to do. And so it put literally hundreds of millions of dollars of liquidity back in to what they needed to do. And then we gave them a game plan, a marketing game plan.
And I got to tell you, the fact that you're able to do that is critical. And I think I mentioned to you earlier that, you know, we went across the state and realized that in the first round of PPP, a lot of our Black and Latino and other minority companies just didn't have the same bank relationships, weren't front of the line, as they say, and really were just left out. And we said, no, we're not going to let that happen in the second round. And so similarly, you know, we had to set up essentially it was a coalition, very powerful group came together around the business service organizations with some banks and with CDFIs and set up kind of like a triage to get people's applications in, and actually ended up working with about 5 banks. And again, into the millions, we were able to make sure that money came to our Massachusetts smaller, mostly Black and brown businesses. So no different of the importance of, I guess they call it the technical assistance, but smart technical assistance where you need it at the right time to really push the envelope. And I also want to get to a question because part of that primarily was, well, how do we get capital and credit in the hands of folks? And that was a unique situation. It was almost like grant money in some ways, or relief capital, so critical to a lot of these small businesses that are still, a lot of them are hanging on while we're in the middle, far from over from what's going on.
And I think the other big thing, Glenn, I'm sure you have it too. People need to know they deal with people they trust. Small business didn't want to be sold something. And so we call them our members because they own the company. They know they trust us because our success totally depends upon their success. And so trust is incredibly important for family businesses. And in a cooperative environment, they know they own. I always say, we're the great equalizer. The big multi-billion-dollar companies. I mean, do we really want to live in a world where 5 people have the same wealth as half the world's population? The billionaires, I saw that their wealth was increased $2.5 billion a day last year. And yet the amount of inequality in America doubled in the last 20 years. I mean, we are going in the wrong direction. And I believe family businesses can be that, that provides economic wealth. That provides the middle class. When you lose a family business, you start to lose middle class America. And that really is what is ruining so much of our inequality, leading to it.
I totally feel your passion. And the way I say and look at it is it's almost like we have to create our own feedback loops that strengthen these businesses. The corporates, right, in some ways, they have their, in terms of access to market capital, really smart folks strategy. How do we make sure that our smaller, independent companies have that same access? That's the work that we're both doing, I think, which is critical. And I think, and one quick thing on that in terms of your point around trust, in looking at your background and probably mine too, is the fact that we've lived as entrepreneurs and we've run, we made payroll and we know the stresses and all the ins and outs of that. I think we can look entrepreneurs in the eye and really, and that helps accelerate the trust, I should say, right? Because we understand the language, what folks are going through.
Yeah, and I think the need is so much greater now. In a normal time, 1,500 family businesses close every day. And I just saw a statistic came out that from February to April, 3.3 million businesses stopped operating. I mean, that's a phenomenal number. And what's interesting is double the amount of minority businesses closed during that period.
Yeah, close to half a million on the Black ownership side, which right, we're not that percentage of the population, right? Yes.
Right. So it's enormous. So the help, and I think what cooperatives do, cooperatives give them shared ownership and shared hope. And that's what people need. I always say, they might need subsidies. They don't want subsidies. They want opportunity. And, there's just a great story, and I'm going to tell it if I have time. There's a great cooperative in Togo, West Africa, that I think really tells the history of cooperatives in so many wonderful ways. It's called Alafia. And Alafia was originally in Togo. They had a lot of shea trees that had nuts on them. And the women would go, 90% of women dropped out of school. They live in extreme poverty. And they would pick the nuts and bring them to market and get pennies for them. A person from the UN came and saw what was happening. And then, because the big companies would come buy the nuts and make them into shea butter, and said, something? We should form a cooperative. And they built a warehouse, and all the women started to bring the nuts to the warehouse. And then they made a product with the nuts called Alafia shea butter. And today, those women now it was started out with 200 women. There are 7,000 women in the cooperative in Togo. They make 4 times what they used to make, not 10% more, not 20, 4 times. And the cooperative has built 10 schools, donated 7,000 bicycles for kids to get to school. And the product is sold in 2,000 stores in America. And that's the power of a cooperative. These women went from making pennies in extreme poverty to making over a living wage and having schools and ways for the kids to get to schools, and they own the company. That's the power of a cooperative.
I love that story in so many ways. And I also want to, promote cooperatives from my side because, a lot of our small companies, these owners don't have exit plan. I mean, who are you going to sell your company to at the end of the day, right? It's actually, in a lot of ways, smart business, right? These are the folks who help build your business. why not look at, and there's a lot of tax advantages to think about turning it into an ESOP and other types of kind of, worker-owned play. So I want to say that's something for us all to look at as small businesses. I actually, Howard, I think I may mention on another call with you is I was able to go to the city of Mondragon. So I'm,
Oh, yes.
which is the holy city for all folks who know anything about cooperatives. And I advise folks, if they haven't heard about Mondragon, to look it up and research it, because there's an example of, I think that's the 40s they started, of a congregate, an aggregation of a number of co-ops where they're, 100,000 workers and just really being successful, where every employee has one vote equal to anyone else around how these companies are managed and run. And it's an incredible example of what can really happen if you really go all out into the cooperative movement. So,
well, and I think that's what cooperatives are very entrepreneurial. I think somehow people think they're a nonprofit. They're not a nonprofit. They're very entrepreneurial, like Mondragon. Mondragon, you're exactly right, has over 100,000 people. It's a multi-billion dollar, I think it's like a $30 billion cooperative, and unbelievably successful. But the profit all goes back to the members, and it's inclusive. And I think by the nature of a cooperative, everybody has one vote. It's inclusive. Everybody from every race, every gender has the same equality in a cooperative. Right. And that's what's needed in our society. That's right.
And they look out for each other, Howard. And I think you told me earlier is when we went through the last recession, you had less layoffs. You had people who are actually, these are stronger businesses. And I know Mondragon, they make it one of their principles that people move around so that there's job security and such. So I think that's all happening in your experience, no?
Yes, no. I mean, look at during the recession, in many of the industries we're in, about 25% went out of business. We had less than 2% go out of business. And I think in COVID, we're going to see the same thing. We know that family businesses are vulnerable, but the one thing they need is scale. And how do you get scale without somebody taking advantage of them? And a cooperative is they own it. They're part of it. It's shared ownership, shared wealth.
And I'd be so bold to say appropriate scale. So it's not a point where you're getting sold or you're turning into some of the corporates that are actually some of the that bring the challenges.
Right.
Let's get to the right size and stay that right size and stay competitive, providing services and jobs and so on and so forth for our communities. To your point, we are in a capitalist system. I don't see that changing too soon. So let's make sure that it's more equitable, distributed. If I could give you, and I think we're about to open up the questions a little story. I need your help on this. Maybe is so one of the companies that I work with in our program, but I also am involved with, is looking to convert to an employee stock purchase plan, ESPP, which is a unique structure, but it pretty much creates this broader ownership, and we're just in that process now. It's a food service business, very exciting, and these are typically folks. A lot of our folks are kind of just above minimum wage, but we have a management team. But these are folks who are mostly from the communities, the Black and Latino community, and an opportunity to really own a piece of the business, which I'm really excited about. Moving towards. So I think we can experiment with different models clearly and show the broader competitive economic world that there's a different way of thinking when we think about ownership.
Well, I think you're right, Glynn. I think we have to look and say that the current economic model is working only for the very few, and it's getting worse. And that is becoming more of a problem in our society, where more people are losing much more of the middle class to lower class. If I look at co-ops as an extremely great alternative model that's entrepreneurial, that really brings wealth to the middle class and can lift up those in the lower class to be middle class. I look, there was not one incubator accelerator in the United States. There were 7,000 accelerators like Techstars across the United States. The first accelerator for co-ops incubator was just started last year, called Start.coop. Out of Boston, but it's for co-ops around the country to really provide a place that new co-ops can come. And I've seen just tremendous opportunities of co-ops that have such extreme social value and still entrepreneurial. And I think that's the great combination. Can you be an organization that provides entrepreneurial, capitalism, and social value at the same time. And I think it's possible.
So one question I would have for you, and I think we're about to open up to questions, is can we, I know you guys are very large, what you're doing. How do we scale what you're talking about across the country? Or you're already doing that in a lot of ways, Howard. Is there
I think
potential for scale on your concept?
Well, I think there is. Look, we're looking into a lot of new costs, but I think Start.coop is an opportunity for people to look and say, I have a business idea, and how can I take that business idea? You know, there's one of the new ones called 40 Acre, and I know in the most recent one, Start.coop, and it's a Black woman that has seen farmers foreclosed upon in America, Black farmers, at double the rate of white farmers. And she's providing a hemp seed, a special hemp seed that's branded for Black farmers in America, because hemp seed is one of the few that's growing at an enormous rate. And so it's going to be a co-op owned by all the farmers with an opportunity to make money in a place where they wouldn't normally look. And I think that's what we have to do, is find opportunities for the underserved in a place that they can own it.
Howard, I can't believe we're ending with that. You just talked about Black farmers and hemp seeds, two very special topics of mine.
Right,
So
that's great.
I think that's, if you talk about innovation and where we're going with this stuff, that's a great place. I think we're running out of time to end our session and bring in Rachel.
Great.
Hello.
Thank you so much. Thank you both, Glenn and Howard. I hate to break up this conversation, but we do have some really interesting questions for you from our audience, and wonderfully, we have a very broad audience. I received an email just before this started from someone, a viewer in Edinburgh, and we have a question here from Bangladesh. So you were just talking, Howard, about the United States, and this viewer asks, says that in Bangladesh, small businesses are also facing great challenges. How has your response differed from business owners not in the United States?
Well, I think it's a great question, Rachel. You know, I was very fortunate to be in Rwanda in November, where they had the International Co-op Alliance meeting for the co-ops from around the world. It represented 100 countries. And originally, I wasn't sure why they were holding Rwanda. So Rwanda, as we all know, had the genocide over 25 years ago. And coming out of the genocide, you know, you imagine the amount of conflict, the economy was terrible, but also the conflict between neighbor to neighbor, what happened was so terrible. And co-ops lifted them out. The head of Rwanda went and explained to us, if it wasn't for co-ops, Rwanda would have never come out and been the country it is today. So in Rwanda, a country of 12 million people, there are over 5,000 types of co-ops, not members, and over 45% of the population. Out of 12 million people, almost 1 out of every 2 is a member of a co-op in Rwanda. And Rwanda is growing at one of the fastest rates in Africa, and said, if it wasn't for co-ops, they would never have come out from a democratic control and an economic control. So I think the opportunity in so many countries is there, because the co-ops in Rwanda can be everything from farming co-ops to craft co-ops to, you know, mining co-ops. The co-op structure can work in almost any environment. And in a lot of countries around the world, it's really what's taken them out of poverty.
Great. Thank you so much, Howard. So our next question from the audience is for both of you, and they ask, what is your practical advice for any organization to adopt these successful strategies now in this moment? Glenn, do you want to give it a try first?
Sure. I mean, I think if you're talking about entrepreneurship and small business growth and development, if you're not in business, I think there's opportunities there's always opportunity. But a lot of our companies right now are reevaluating what growth looks like, and in some ways what survival looks like. And so I can give a host of advice around what that means, but you know, straight out of the gate, it's understand your numbers and your cash flow, right? And we've advised a lot of folks around preserving cash, and then everything from if you have to pivot to what level of pivot. So our advice gets very specific around where you are, and we customize it to the company. But I think in general, I think, you know, I think what the the professional economists are telling us is, we're reaching the floor, but there's going to be a steady growth over the next, decade or so. So I think, even though we feel at dark times right now, there's going to be opportunity to grow companies, over the next decade. And so, and all of that is fundamentals. It's understanding having a really good idea, having, a really strong team, access to capital, understanding how you acquire your customers. And so I think there are business fundamentals that are universal. And I think my partner Howard would agree. It's making sure that the folks can execute them at the top level.
Yeah, Glenn, I totally do agree with that. And I think the other part that I would say is, if people are doing the same thing that somebody else is facing in their community, in the next city, in the next area, they need to understand how to get scale. Because that is, to me, the biggest issue with family and small business today is, do you need scale? We're in a world where technology is driving everything. And yet you can't expect a family business to figure out the technology aspect. You can't expect them to be buying at the same rate as an Amazon. So you need scale, and there's ways to get scale. So I would say, whether it's a nonprofit, because we've looked at nonprofits are like little small cottage industries. When we started in the childcare world, it was because the Aspen Institute came to us and said, we want to study a model. Kirsten Moy, who was in charge of scaling for nonprofits for the Aspen Institute, said, we're trying to figure out how to scale nonprofits, but the executive director of a nonprofit is like the owner of a small business. That's what drives it, but they need scale. They need scale of technology and fundraising. They need scale on cybersecurity. They need scale on marketing. How do you provide scale, to me, and there's an opportunity to provide scale in a cooperative model, a contemporary cooperative model, without losing their independence. So to me, it's the best of both worlds. But I think people have to look and say, it's okay if you don't do it alone. How can you do it that you still have control, but you're not doing it alone? You need a partner.
I could actually, if I could, Rachel, I couldn't agree more. And you highlighted something that I really want to make a comment, which is, look, I work within a bank structure right now, one of the larger regional banks in New England, and they invest heavily in technology, right? Just to stay relevant and competitive. And imagine what that means for some of our small companies. We saw that even pre-COVID. When you look at some of the issues, it's talent, it's capital, but it is also, it's digital, because the economy has been changing so much. And now, if you don't have a digital platform that's effective, you don't have access to your customers, clearly, right? In the COVID era. So I can't emphasize that enough. And I do think that there's room for mitigation of nonprofits or other types of support. How do we make sure that at least our smaller companies have access to the same platforms, whether it be cybersecurity, access to customers through digital platforms? So I want to double down on that comment.
No, I think that's just so important. Of course, we're a nonprofit, the Kennedy Library Foundation, and we face those challenges, as you said, pre-COVID, with technology and just how fast the technology changes and becomes obsolete, and the resources that you need to keep up with it. So I think I can relate to that, and I think it's such an important point here in terms of lifting up our small businesses. Here's another question for both of you. How can large investors and contractors bring more capital into these types of businesses now? Maybe this time we'll start with you, Howard.
Well, I think that's one of the most critical questions there is, and I think so appropriate, because we need an economic model that's made for all, not the chosen few. And right now, the economic model goes to not how we're going to help out the majority, but how we're going to really give enormous returns to a small group of people that have enormous amount of funds. I think we need capital going to new economic models that really are scalable. And I think that's important. They can't just deal with 4 or 5 people. They need to look at, our problems are massive in our society. And so the challenge is, how do you funnel money into something that is scalable? And I believe that the cooperative model, number one, is scalable, it's entrepreneurial, but it needs capital. And patient capital has not come into the cooperative model, even though it's a very safe model. Very few cooperatives ever go out of business. But also, you might not get the initial return out of it. But people have to look and say, well, you know something? It's not working in our society when we have the inequality growing and when we have so many people being left out of our society. So we need capital coming in. It's probably the biggest barrier right now to starting more co-ops that can service so many more people of all color, of all race, diversity. It's there to have happen in a way that's scalable and ownership, and will give people hope and dignity. And that's what people need.
Yeah, I think Howard hit both two important legs of the stool on that question, right? He ended with the capital. I think you started with the issue around contracts and what can the larger corporates do. I said earlier in my comments that, you know, they need to look at where they spend their money, and they need to be honest with themselves, and they need to put pressure. It needs to start at the the CEO level, all the way down to the procurement level. Like, no, this is one of our priorities as an organization to make sure that we have a better diverse spend. And we've seen some stuff like we call it the Massport model here in Massachusetts, where one of the quasi-government agencies, what they said before they put the RFP out for a development project, they said how we rate the winner is around racial equity. And that's going to be, and you can't even come to the table unless you're bringing that as part of the, part of the scoring if you're going to get the job. That forces folks to like look around and go, wait a second, who do I need to partner with? And we saw the number of diverse applicants really rise when you change your RFP process. And so, you get the Rooney Rule and other things out there where you have to have at least one diverse supplier in every bid. So I think there's ways that folks can really push themselves, but I think if you don't measure it, it doesn't change, and really set metrics. And one thing that I know that Eastern Bank does, I could say, is it's part of the package of the folks leading the procurement of those departments. They're measured on that as part of their annual assessment. And when you start doing that, behaviors change. So that's just a wide range of things that within the corporate culture, some of these corporate organizations you could do to change the numbers.
Well, I think we could probably continue this conversation all day, but unfortunately we've reached our last question. And this is again for both of you. And we want to just know how can we make this conversation continue? What should our top 1 to 2 priorities be over the next 6 to 18 months to make sure that this continues, these types of conversations continue, and particularly the work continues?
Is that me first, Howard?
Sure, Glenn. Absolutely.
Well, I mean, I would say, we are in a moment of time right now, right? I mean, we haven't seen anything like this. And so this is not just the pandemic, but also after Mr. Floyd's unfortunate passing, people are up in arms around structural issues that this country is coming to terms with. And so I would suggest that we, what's going to happen over the next few months, we take that passion and we put it into long-term solutions. I mean, we have to approach this structurally. This didn't happen overnight in terms of the racial equity divide. It's not going to be solved overnight. So I would push us to really think about what's out there that's working, not about reinventing the wheel, and doubling down on those platforms that are really getting results around, in this particular talk that we're talking about, small businesses. In my world, it's Black and Latino and other folks in the racial wealth gap businesses. How do we make sure that we level the playing field and get them growing and thriving the way they should so they reach their full potential, really? And all the pieces that make that happen. And we talked about access to capital and credit, access to really good advice, making sure we get access to the contracts and other, the digital divide. So there's definitely a lot of doors in to make this thing work. So that's what I would push the audience. And let's not let up on it. Let's make sure we keep this as our top priority going into the next, multiple years.
Glenn, I agree. And I think it's a moral imperative of ours to understand that we need an economic model that is not extractive. I mean, I believe in capitalism 100%, but it has to be capitalism with a conscience, and capitalism gives people hope and dignity. And I think we have to look and understand that just because the stock market goes up doesn't mean that there aren't so many people left behind. There's not opportunity. And we need to give people opportunity and hope. And I think if I was to say with people, I think you need to have discussion of what new economic models can give people that in a way that's scalable and it's made for all of us, not a few of us.
Thank you so much. Thank you both. And I love just ending on that note, Howard, because I think I know President Kennedy, in his address on civil rights in 1963, framed the issue of equality really as a moral issue. So to leave us in this conversation on that note, that and recommit ourselves to the moral imperative of pushing towards equality is so important today. Thank you both for joining us today and illustrating the power of collaborative leadership to create business growth, build resilience, and become stronger after challenges. And thank you all for watching. We invite you to share your thoughts and feedback at nfn@jfklfoundation.org. And we hope that you'll join us on August 21st for the next New Frontier Fridays conversation. All of us at the JFK Library continue to hold you and your loved ones in our thoughts. And we look forward to the day that we can be together again in Columbia Point at the Kennedy Library. Thank you so much and be well.